Hey everybody, how we doing? Mr. Hancock here. Welcome to the introduction to Victorian literature, and more specifically Alfred Lord Tennyson. Just a really quick video just to kind of give you a little bit of an understanding as to what we're going into, and a little bit about your reading. So, the way to look at this, and there's a lot of different ways to kind of discuss moving into Victorian England and discussing Queen Victoria. A lot of it can be political, a lot of it is social, and so on. And I don't want to go deep into a rabbit hole with that stuff. I want to focus in context of the culture and how people are moving in certain areas as far as their personal beliefs and so on. So the first thing to go back and see, and we could notice this looking back, if we start to look at, and I've kind of mentioned this before, but if we kind of start going and looking at literary, artistic movements, anything political, social movements, anything like that, something that's very common is that you start to see it's almost like a rejection of the previous, of the parents' generation or the previous generation. So whatever you see is going on in the previous movement, the next movement is almost like a rejection of that, and they want to go opposite, and they want to rebel against it and go forward. And that's something we kind of see, and it kind of cycles in a way. And I think right now, if I can ponder upon, like, currently, I think we're kind of repeating more of a romanticism movement in a sense. But now it's starting to move away from that, and we're starting to see more enlightenment in a way. It's weird. It's kind of mixing. It's a little bit different, but you still start to see focus on an individual. Then you start to see a focus on society. Then you start to see a focus on certain things as the primary focus. But what we had in the Enlightenment, in the Age of Reason, was focus on the reason, focus on logic over emotion, focus on not on individuals and your personal feelings, but focus on the whole, focus on the society, focus on the group of people, that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few kind of thing. And so that's what we saw there. Then we moved into the Romantics, into Romanticism, and it was an opposite of that. It was a flip. It was a focus on we're going to focus on emotion. We're going to focus on the individual. We're going to focus on personal experience. Not growth and, any kind of like scientific revolution. We're going to focus on nature. So you kind of see that opposite movement there. Everything's going to be in excess. Everything's going to be very radical in how we feel and indulge for ourselves. And now what we see when we're going into the Victorians is kind of a flip away from that. Things become a lot more reserved. Things become a lot more focused on who you are as a people. And I want to say this because I think there's a bad rap on the Victorians. They're very prude. You show your ankles. It's like pornography, all that kind of stuff. And it's not necessarily the case. Their culture at the time was focused on different things. That's what you always see. And I'm telling you, look for this. Every succeeding, generation always looks back on the preceding generation as being old, archaic, boring, medieval, and just bad, and everything just negative. They want to focus on how bad our parents were, how bad our grandparents' generation was, and what they did, and how we're always so much better. Every generation does that, it seems like. Our generation does it, and so on before, and you can kind of look back and say everybody's looking at the Victorians and saying that. And in actuality, there's a lot of really good stuff that came from the Victorian era. So it's known as the Victorian era due to Queen Victoria, and so there are a few things that I want you to look for when you're going into reading these pieces. The first one being Alfred Lord Tennyson's Lady of Shalott. So when we're going into this, what we see is, first of all, and something that I can't really go into. So before I go into Lady Shalott, what we need to look for, let me give you a little more information about Victorians, because I can keep going on. I got to really keep myself focused here. Something that's different than the Romantics was very poetry heavy. The Victorians is opposite. This is the birth of the major part of the English novel. It's the era of the English novel, like Jane Eyre, and all the stuff coming, Wuthering Heights. Then you have with Jane Austen and so on. Then you have like Charles Dickens coming out with Oliver Twist. You have Tale of Two Cities. You have all these big, thick, what some people think is boring English novels. This is the birthplace. I wouldn't say it's the birth. There were English novels and stuff like Frankenstein before this, but this is the beginning of the explosion in the power of the large, thick English novel during this time. And so poetry, like Tennyson, it's still there, but now is when you really see the novels really come out. And the novels are telling a lot more of a story. They're giving a lot more of a realistic feeling to the readers. It's not so much fantasy feeling like you saw with like Samuel Taylor Coleridge or anything like that. It's not focusing on so much. It's really, you're starting to move into realism. We're starting to see a lot of real stuff, real people, real dialects, real locations, stuff that people can connect to, real descriptions, nothing fantastic about it. It's real stuff, real people. And that's one thing that's very important. Another major important part of this is that with the Romantics we had, there was a focus on the agrarian, nature, living in the country, everything like that. Now we have the Industrial Revolution happening. Everything's moving. So with the growth of the machines and the, factories and everything like that, people are now leaving the country to find work in the city and working in factories with, industry and so on. The problem is that you have an explosion in population and poverty and everything like that of the sense. Cities become overcrowded and dirty and everything like that. Now is when you start to see a big growth of slum area in the urban, all that stuff. Now it's happening. That's why you see people like Charles Dickens with stuff like Oliver Twist and so on. Really, David Copperfield, books like that really show and focus on the grime and the bad conditions and the troubles of the real people during the time. So that's another very, very important thing you see. Something that is very big that we're going to see with Lady of Shalott, with Tennyson, is when there is a push towards what I call Englishness. And that's just an idea of nationalism. It's just who you are as a people. And you understand something too, because nowadays the word nationalism has a bad connotation and stuff like that. Nationalism on the definition sense just means a focus on who you are as a nation and your people in your nation, and focusing on that first, okay? So it's like focusing on your household. Think of it that way. You got your household, you do your household first, you get that in order, and then everything else that happens outside, that's what matters. So you think of it that way, but with a nation, okay? So with that sense, with Englishness, there's new growth and pride in being English, knowing where you come from, knowing your history, and so on. And with that being said, now we see a new growth and explosion in what we call Arthurian literature, like King Arthur. Going back and looking at the origins of where you've come from and who you are. So now you start to see folks start writing like Tennyson, going back and looking at, Arthur and King Arthur and the Round Table. And there's a little bit of fantasy obviously mixed in with that in this type of literature. But still, there's a focus on being proud of that. It's not showing the dark, negative aspects of it all. It's showing who you are, the good stuff, being proud of it, the might that you come from, and who it makes you today. And so when we look at Lady Shalott, that is the setting when it talks about being in Camelot, when Lancelot looks at her. So we are in that Arthurian area, okay? Something else we don't get the chance to do because this is a survey course is that now is when we see the explosion with women's rights and women's literature. You have a lot of amazing women writers that are starting to come to the forefront and doing a lot, and their books and their writings are still very much popular today. Like I said, Jane Austen and so on. We can keep going. The problem is, like I said, because we have just a little bit of time to cover so much, is that I don't have a chance in this level of course to grab a novel and say we're going to read this entire novel. But there are other upper level English courses that do that. Especially with women's literature, you're going to grab a lot, or you should be grabbing a lot of Victorian writings there. So that's something, really to keep in mind as well. So there. Now, Tennyson. Let's talk about Tennyson for a second. Tennyson was a very, very big, very important, very, popular, I guess you could say, poet at the time. Of course, things are moving away from poetry, moving into books and moving into novels. And that's kind of where we see. Back in the Romanticism was the heyday of poetry. All right, and poetry's always been popular there. But back then, you could be just you could be a celebrity and make a lot of money being a poet. Now it's starting to go downhill. And now, even like today, very few people are able to make a living being poets alone. So that's gone down. However, writers, people who write books, they can make a lot of money, and movies and so on like that too. So now is when we're starting to see poetry kind of go down and the novel come up. But still, Tennyson was a poet, and he did a lot of focus on Arthurian writings, okay? And there's a lot he's done. In Memoriam, Charge of the Light Brigade. There's a ton of stuff that we can do, but we're just going to focus on one of his most popular, The Lady of Shalott. The Lady of Shalott, as I said, focuses on a lady in a tower who has to see the world through a mirror. Okay, this is something to really keep in mind here, because it's going to make sense when we go into what the theme is, what the point is. She has to see the world through a mirror. But it gets to a point where she said, I'm sick of this, I'm done with it, and she smashes the mirror, she leaves, and she gets on the boat and rides down into Camelot to where everybody is, because she's on the island of Shalott, locked in this tower in a way. So as she does that and so on, you see that she ends up dying and everything like that. Not a spoiler, read the poem if you don't know it already. But a big part of it, and one of the biggest lines, is at the very end when she's dead and rolls up in that boat and Lancelot finds her, because she wanted to see Lancelot. She wanted to be with Lancelot. And so when Lancelot looks at her, all he says is, wow, she has a pretty face. And that's very important to understand, is that it's focusing, what is he focusing on? He's focusing on, frankly, the superficial. He has no idea what she's about, no idea her troubles, no idea what she's gone through, no idea what she sacrificed to get to him, no what she gave up to get to him. All he notices is her pretty face. And so there, you can take that in many areas. Even people have taken the point to say, this is like the artist, the unappreciated artist. The artist sees the world through a mirror, like a different lens as everybody else. But the world, even though it consumes the art, it doesn't appreciate the artist. But then we can look at it and see, this is how the treatment of women, a treatment of other people in relationships, just the treatment of the world. You can see you can take it many places. But that's something we really, really see. So pay close attention to the way the Lady of Shalott sees the world, what the Lady of Shalott needs and wants and desires compared to what she can have, and compared to what she's willing to give up to get what she wants for herself at the time, okay? So that's a big part of what we're looking at there. When we move into next week, I'll give you a little bit more on Romanticism and the readings and context of Victorian literature and everything in that sense. I've yapped enough. There you go. If you have any questions, please let me know.